We rate about 130 odd sovereigns across the globe, and in these sovereigns our assessments reflect the creditworthiness of these countries, which is the willingness and ability to repay debt on time and in full. And in order for us to do this, we look at basically 5 broad factors, and these include the institutional assessment, the economic assessment, the external assessment, the fiscal and debt burden assessments, and the monetary assessment. So these 5 components make up an indicative rating. Then we can make some adjustments to get to a final rating. So being here talking about South Africa, we are looking at the South Africa's rating at BBB- with a negative outlook. South Africa's rating was started in 1994 in the BB category and was upgraded to the highest level of BBB+ around 2006 and stayed stable at that level. Since 2012, the ratings have been under pressure, and we've had 2 notches downgrades from BBB+ to get to BBB- where we are today. The pressures affecting the ratings include the way we view the institutional assessment, which includes the politics and the policy framework and the outcomes of a country, as well as the weak economic growth that we've seen in the last few years, which remains still a pressure point on the ratings, as well as the fiscal and debt position of the country, which was increased between 2009 up until this time when government was doing a counter-cyclical fiscal policy stance, and now the focus of government is now to unwind that through the fiscal consolidation path, which was recently outlined in the February budget. And the focus outlined in the February budget underscore part of our affirmation story in the June report that we published. What we're seeing at the moment are weaknesses in economic growth that needs to turn around in order to maintain the ratings where they are. I think South Africa has suffered an economic growth phase because partly is the global story and partly is the domestic story, which is some of the economic constraints that comes from, for example, the labor issues that we've seen, strikes, as well as the electricity costs, as well as the policy clarity on the part of government, issues around mining legislation and other sectors. So these are some of the constraints that are impacting on South Africa's rating. So our next review comes up in December, according to the scheduled calendar that we publish our ratings every 6 months. So in the interim, we are looking at some of these constraints in terms of how the government is addressing some of these domestic constraints in order to improve growth, and also we're looking at how some of the political dynamics are playing out and how these may flow through to the policy framework as well as to the outcomes that we'll observe. So more recently, we've seen a number of events that are politically related, that impact on the institutional assessment, that can also impact on the reform momentum that has been started, that can also impact on the social contract, and that can impact on investor confidence. So it is also important that these factors, the political contestation, executive cohesion, are kept in check and they do not destabilize the reform momentum that is currently in place, that can also then help to have a higher growth path, at least in the medium term, that can also help the rating. So these are the pressure points that we're looking at going ahead for the rest of the year and in the other years as well. A part of the weaknesses in the economic story is that private sector investment is contributing very low to the pace of economic growth. So in fact, it's contributing negatively. So what we are saying is private sector investments are not being sufficient to lift growth. So this could be a combination of factors that South African companies have also been going across to the other countries, be it in the neighboring countries or across the continent and other regions where they've been finding opportunities that are profitable, that generates the returns of investments they need. So that's been a constraint to South Africa's investment profile, South Africa's rating. So it is important that government, together with labor and private sector, that they've come together in a social contract that would like to work along these issues and try and improve the operating environment, which will help businesses to make the investment decisions. So ultimately, this is what would help part of the economic growth story. But it is also important to understand that there have been discussions and there will continue to be discussions, but is to make that leap from discussions into the actual implementation of the key issues, the key constraints. That is what will help medium-term growth potential of South Africa. I think that's an ideal position, and it takes a lot of time. You cannot easily move from 15% of GDP to 25% or 30%. That requires a lot of time, and that is something that cannot be done in the short term. Even in the medium term, it takes more than 2, 3, 5 years to get to that level of investment, unless there is something special that has happened, which could involve some greenfield projects, some resources that require huge investments, excluding one-off or resources factors that would be unlikely to achieve in a short term.